Right now, on March 9th, Iran has a new supreme leader, named just yesterday and already threatened by two governments that want him eliminated. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei. He is 56 years old, and his path to power is unlike anything in the modern history of this region. His father was assassinated on February 28th in the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran. His wife, Zahra Hadad, was killed in that same strike on the compound. One of his children was killed in that same strike. His mother, Mansoureh Khojesteh Baherzadeh, died from her wounds on March 2nd. His entire immediate family, gone in a single week. And yet, just 8 days after those strikes, the Assembly of Experts named him the third Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran. No public vote, no campaign, no public debate. Just 88 clerics casting a ballot under the shadow of an active war that was still ongoing. Most of them met online, because gathering in person had become too dangerous for the people choosing Iran's next Supreme Leader. The announcement came in the early hours of March 8th, and within hours, Donald Trump went on ABC News and delivered a statement no sitting U.S. president has made quite this directly about a foreign head of state. Trump's exact words, "He's going to have to get approval from us. If he doesn't get approval from us, he's not going to last long." That is the President of the United States threatening the newly appointed head of state of a sovereign nation, before that leader had even given his first public address to the Iranian people. And Trump had been sending signals even before the vote. On March 5th, he told Axios, "They're wasting their time. Khamenei's son is a lightweight." Trump added, "I have to be involved in the appointment. Khamenei's son is unacceptable to me." That statement came 3 days before the vote even happened. The Israel Defense Forces had already posted a statement in Farsi on X, directed at every person involved in the succession process, before the vote was finalized. The IDF wrote, "The hand of the State of Israel will continue to pursue every successor and every person who seeks to appoint a successor. We warn all those who intend to participate in the successor selection meeting that we will not hesitate to target you either. This is a warning." Israel was not just threatening the candidate, it was threatening every cleric who voted for him. Even choosing this man made you a target. Then Senator Lindsey Graham posted on X that Mojtaba was not the change we're looking for, and that it was just a matter of time before he meets his father's fate. 3 statements, 3 voices, all within days of the appointment, all carrying the same message. This succession is unacceptable, and the man who just took power is already in our crosshairs. Now, before we get into who Mojtaba actually is, let's sit with what just happened structurally. Because the speed of this succession tells you something critical about Iran's current state. Ali Khamenei had ruled Iran since 1989, 37 years. The final authority on every decision that mattered: military, nuclear, economic, foreign policy. His death didn't just remove a leader, it removed the single institutional anchor that had held Iran's entire power structure together for nearly 4 decades. According to Iran International, the IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, immediately began pressuring the Assembly of Experts through in-person meetings and phone calls to move fast and install Mojtaba. The process was anything but smooth. 8 assembly members threatened to boycott a second electoral session, describing what they called unbearable pressure from IRGC commanders. Several clerics also raised objections about Mojtaba's limited religious credentials. He holds the rank of Hojjatul Islam, 1 level below Ayatollah, the same problem his father faced in 1989. His father solved that problem by having the Constitution amended. According to Discern Report and Wikipedia, a similar workaround is already being discussed for Mojtaba right now. The announcement was also deliberately delayed multiple times, not over disagreement on who would win, but out of fear of assassination. Officials feared that the moment Mojtaba's name became public, Israel would strike before he could reach a secure location. They delayed to give him time to disappear first. Think about what that means. Iran appointed a supreme leader and had to hide the timing of its own announcement out of fear he would be killed before assuming office. Mojtaba has not appeared publicly since February 28th. He has not issued a single statement. According to Mehr News Agency, he survived the February 28th strike. But he has been in hiding ever since. That is the situation the Islamic Republic finds itself in this morning, March 9th, 2026. A new supreme leader who is in hiding, silent, and already marked for elimination. Now let's talk about who Mojtaba Khamenei actually is, because most Western coverage treats him like a ghost, a name that surfaced in intelligence reports and then vanished. Mojtaba Hosseini Khamenei was born on September 8, 1969, in Mashhad. He joined the Revolutionary Guard in 1987 at 17, serving in the Iran-Iraq War, where his deep personal bonds with IRGC commanders were first forged. After the war, he studied theology in Qom under Mahmoud Hashemi Sharudi, and later under Taqi Mesbah Yazdi, a mentor who would shape his entire ideological framework. The Atlantic Council described Yazdi as one of the most ideologically extremist clerics in the entire Iranian establishment. That is who shaped Mojtaba's worldview. He has never run for elected office. He has never given a public sermon. According to Iran International, many Iranians have never heard his voice. And yet, for decades, he was quietly accumulating power behind the scenes of the most important decisions the Islamic Republic made. What he has done is build a dense personal network inside the IRGC's intelligence and security branches, the parts of the system that operate entirely outside public view. U.S. diplomatic cables published by WikiLeaks referred to Mojtaba as the power behind the robes, the man who controlled access to his father and coordinated all political and security affairs from the shadows. One cable alleged he tapped his own father's phone. Another called him a capable and forceful leader, while noting his lack of theological qualifications and his unmatched alliances inside the security apparatus. He is also, according to a Bloomberg investigation published in January 2026, connected to a vast offshore financial empire. Swiss bank accounts, British luxury properties, Persian Gulf shipping interests. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned him in 2019 for advancing what it called his father's destabilizing regional ambitions and oppressive domestic objectives. That sanction was never lifted. And here is the detail that almost nobody is reporting today. According to Iran International, his own father reportedly never allowed the issue of Mojtaba's succession to be raised during his lifetime. Ali Khamenei allegedly feared it would make the Islamic Republic look like a monarchy, echoing the Pahlavi dynasty that the 1979 revolution overthrew, and whose hereditary rule was the revolution's defining target. And yet, the IRGC pushed, the assembly voted, and the man his own father apparently didn't want is now the third supreme leader of Iran, appointed under bombardment, his family decimated, in hiding, with two foreign governments threatening his survival before he makes a single public appearance. In my view, the speed of this appointment tells you more than the appointment itself. The IRGC needed a figurehead at the top before Iran's political structure started fragmenting under the pressure of the war. Mojtaba was the choice that kept the IRGC's own power intact. That is the real story of March 8th, not a theological succession, but an institutional power consolidation carried out under fire. What this suggests is that whoever actually governs Iran through this war won't be Mojtaba the theologian or Mojtaba the diplomat. It will be Mojtaba, the IRGC-dependent figurehead, a man whose authority depends entirely on keeping the loyalty of the same commanders who installed him, commanders who are still fighting an active war against the world's most powerful military coalition. The Daily Telegraph predicted he would view the United States as an implacable enemy and would be unlikely to make any compromises. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy warned he may move quickly toward nuclear weapons, specifically to prevent future U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. If this kind of layered, sourced analysis is why you watch this channel, drop a comment right now. Tell me, do you think Mojtaba Khamenei survives 90 days in power? Hit the like button. It is the single best way to get this analysis in front of the people who need to understand what is actually happening right now. Because next, we are going to break down what the Israeli threat means operationally, what Israel has done before to leaders it decided were dangerous. We will go through the specific tools available right now, and why Mojtaba's silence since February 28th is not just caution. It is the only rational move for a man who knows he is already a target. Stay with me. Israel doesn't just threaten people. It has a documented operational history of making those threats real, in ways that are still studied at intelligence agencies around the world. And to understand whether Mojtaba is actually in danger, or whether those statements are mostly political signaling, you need to look at what Israel has actually done to people it decided were threats. Because the record is detailed, it is long, and it tells you exactly how seriously you should take a public threat from Israeli officials. Let's start with this specific operation that changed how the world thinks about targeted killing in the modern era, and why it matters directly for Mojtaba's situation today. On November 27, 2020, Iranian nuclear scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was driving on a road east of Tehran. He was with his wife. His bodyguards were in vehicles behind him. A blue Zamyed pickup truck was parked on the side of the road. Inside it was a remotely operated machine gun, a US-made FN mag, smuggled into Iran in pieces over 8 months by a Mossad team of roughly 20 operatives. The operation lasted less than a minute, according to the New York Times. The weapon was operated from thousands of miles outside Iran. Artificial intelligence compensated for the recoil, the time delay, and the movement of the target vehicle. Not a single Israeli operative was physically present during the kill. Fakhrizadeh, the man Netanyahu once told the public to remember that name, was dead within hours. Not a single Israeli operative was physically present in Iran at the moment of the kill. That is the operational baseline. That is what Israel demonstrated it could do inside Tehran, without a single agent on the ground during the attack itself. But that was 2020. The intelligence picture inside Iran has changed dramatically since then, and what happened in 2025 makes the 2020 operation look restrained by comparison. According to Al Jazeera's reporting from June 2025, Israeli agents had, by that point, smuggled full drone production facilities into buildings inside Isfahan, a city more than 200 miles south of Tehran. Israeli operatives had assembled drones and stored missiles inside a 3-story building in Tehran, discovered only after the June 2025 strikes began. Iranian state TV showed the contents on camera. According to reporting by The War Zone, during the opening night of Operation Rising Lion in June 2025, Israeli intelligence simultaneously killed 9 of Iran's top nuclear scientists as they slept in their homes. The operation was codenamed Operation Narnia. According to Israel's N12 news outlet, the weapon used remains classified under Israeli military censorship. These scientists believed their homes were safe zones, a senior Israeli official told N12. They never imagined they would be reached in their bedrooms. Al Jazeera also reported that Israeli intelligence spent years hacking Tehran's traffic cameras around Khamenei's Pasteur Street compound to build a precise pattern of his bodyguards' movements. They jammed local mobile phone towers moments before the February 28th strike to prevent guards from receiving any warning in the seconds before impact. The CIA, according to Al Jazeera, tracked Khamenei for months and confirmed he would be at the compound that specific Saturday morning, prompting a joint U.S.-Israeli decision to adjust the timing from night to day. In my view, that last detail is the most important one for understanding Mojtaba's situation right now, because it tells you something critical about how this targeting process actually works. It does not happen in days. It happens over months and years. Pattern of life, traffic cameras, phone intercepts, recruited agents inside the security apparatus itself. The question for Mojtaba is not whether Israel has the capability to reach him. The February 28th operation proved the capability exists at the highest level of Iranian security. The question is whether Israel has already built a pattern of life on him, and what his current behavior in hiding tells us about how seriously he and his advisors are taking that question. Now let's look at the historical context, because Israel's willingness to strike leaders and the diplomatic consequences it has accepted in doing so is itself a data point that most coverage is missing. In September 2024, Israel killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut by dropping more than 80 U.S.-made bunker buster bombs on his underground command center. No warning, no diplomatic channel offered first. In July 2024, Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Tehran, inside a high-security IRGC guest house, considered one of the most protected locations in the Iranian capital. According to CNN and the New York Times, the explosive device had been smuggled into the room by Mossad operatives 2 months before his arrival. It detonated remotely the moment he was confirmed inside. On September 9, 2025, Israel struck Hamas leadership in Doha, Qatar, hitting negotiators mid-meeting during active U.S.-brokered ceasefire talks. The son of Hamas, chief negotiator Khalil al-Hayya, was killed, along with 5 others. The senior leaders themselves survived. Qatar called it an act of state terrorism. The pattern across all 3 operations is consistent. Israel hit targets in countries it was not at war with, Lebanon, Iran, Qatar. It accepted the diplomatic fallout. It did not ask for permission. What this suggests is that Israel's threat to Mojtaba is not constrained by geography. It is not constrained by whether Iran and Israel are in a formal state of war, which they clearly already are. And it is not constrained by the fact that Mojtaba is now a head of state, a designation that typically carries at least some expectation of diplomatic protection under international norms. Israel has never treated diplomatic norms as binding constraints when it believed a target posed an existential threat, and its statements over the past week make clear it views Mojtaba in exactly that category. But here is where the analysis becomes genuinely more complex, and where most coverage is making an oversimplification that matters. Killing Mojtaba Khamenei would not end Iran's nuclear program. It would not remove the IRGC's ballistic missile arsenal. It would not dismantle the institutional structure that produced him. In fact, there is a documented historical argument that Israel's killing campaigns have often achieved the opposite of their strategic goal, eliminating specific individuals while the programs those individuals represented accelerated. That pattern appears repeatedly in the record. Al Jazeera cited analyst Mamoun Abu Amer, who described recent Israeli operations as tactical successes but strategic failures, a verdict with significant evidence behind it. He pointed to Netanyahu's claim after June 2025 that Iran had been set back for generations. 8 months later, the region was engulfed in deeper war than existed before those strikes. The Fakhrizadeh operation reportedly set Iran's program back by months or years. But Iran then enriched uranium to 60% purity. That is a level it had never reached before the assassination campaign began. The program accelerated in the years after its top scientist was killed. In my view, the deepest strategic question surrounding Mojtaba is not whether Israel can kill him. Based on everything we know, the capability almost certainly exists. The deeper question is what Iran does the day after, and whether the IRGC commanders who installed Mojtaba have already wargamed that scenario and built a response plan around it. Because Mojtaba's death would not produce a moderate successor or a more negotiable Iran, it would produce a successor chosen under even more extreme IRGC pressure than the vote that happened on March 8th. The Islamic Republic's factional dynamics right now point in one direction only, and that direction is not toward compromise. And there is one more dimension to this that almost no coverage on March 9th is addressing, a dimension that connects Israel's threat directly to Iran's nuclear calculus. Mojtaba Khamenei, according to the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, is considered likely to accelerate Iran's nuclear program specifically as a deterrent against future strikes. The logic is straightforward. If you believe you will be targeted regardless of whether you have a nuclear weapon, the deterrent value of actually getting one becomes the highest priority decision you can make. Israel's public threat has not reduced Mojtaba's incentive to pursue nuclear capability. Based on the logic of deterrence, the same logic that has governed nuclear strategy since the Cold War, it has increased it. That is the strategic tension sitting at the center of everything happening on March 9th, 2026, and it is one that no military strike can resolve on its own. Next, we are going to look at what Mojtaba's appointment means for Iran's nuclear posture specifically, how close Iran actually is to a weapon right now, and what changed during the war. Because the next 90 days may represent the most consequential window in the entire history of Iran's nuclear program. And the decision Mojtaba makes in that window will shape this region for decades. Stay with me. On March 6th, Donald Trump posted 4 words on Truth Social that define the entire strategic situation Mojtaba Khamenei just inherited. There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. That was Trump on March 6th, posted all caps on Truth Social with no diplomatic framing and no off-ramp. A demand that a country of 90 million people, currently fighting an active war against the most powerful military coalition on earth, formally capitulate. No conditions attached, no diplomatic channel offered, no timeline provided, just a demand that Washington clearly does not expect Tehran to accept immediately. And Iran's response came just as directly. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi told NBC News on March 7th, Iran is not asking for a ceasefire, and Iran is prepared for the possibility of a U.S. ground invasion. That exchange, Trump demanding surrender, Iran rejecting ceasefire, is the environment Mojtaba stepped into on March 9th, 2026. Not as a leader inheriting a stable country, as a man in hiding, leading a nation at war, with no functional negotiating channel and no path to de-escalation that either side has publicly accepted. And yet, this morning, March 9th, there are signals that not everything is as fixed as those public statements suggest, and those signals matter more than the official positions. Iran's President Pezeshkian wrote on social media that some countries had begun mediation efforts, without naming them. That is diplomatic language for back-channel activity. Someone is talking to someone, even if nobody is willing to admit it publicly, while the bombs are still falling and the public positions remain maximalist on both sides. According to CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, Iranian missile attacks have fallen 90% since the war's first day. U.S. and Israeli officials claimed Thursday that 60% of Iran's missile launchers and stockpiles have already been destroyed. A senior Israeli defense official told NPR's Daniel Estrin this weekend that Israel aims to dismantle Iran's military forces within 3 weeks. The plan is to target the army, navy, and military industries to the point that the regime has no fighting force left. 3 weeks. That is the timeline Israel is operating on. That is the military timeline Israel is operating on. 3 weeks. And it has nothing to do with whether Mojtaba Khamenei accepts or rejects any negotiation. In my view, the most important development on March 9th is not the appointment. It is the gap between Iran's collapsing military capacity and the IRGC's political determination to keep fighting, and what Mojtaba Khamenei's role in managing that gap will actually be, as a leader whose power derives entirely from the same institution driving the war. Because here's the detail that Iran International reported this morning, and that almost no Western coverage is fully unpacking right now. Iran's Revolutionary Guards continued launching attacks on neighboring countries, despite President Pezeshkian's direct order to halt such strikes. The president of Iran gave a direct order to the armed forces to stop. The IRGC kept firing anyway, an extraordinary breakdown of civilian authority during an active war. Let that land. The president of Iran gave a direct order. The IRGC ignored it. And the man who now sits above both of them, Mojtaba Khamenei, is the supreme leader whose authority depends entirely on IRGC loyalty. That is not a government under a unified chain of command. That is a system where the institution that installed the supreme leader is now operating independently of the civilian government, and the war is still active. With no ceasefire in sight, no unified Iranian government position, and a new supreme leader who has not yet spoken a single public word. According to the Washington Post, Mojtaba's selection cements hardline theocratic rule and sends a strong message of defiance against Trump. Al Jazeera's analyst Rami Khouri called the appointment an act of defiance and said whether Mojtaba will push for negotiations remains genuinely unknown. But Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf was not ambiguous on March 6th, posting 2 days before the vote with a clear statement of intent. He posted on X that Tehran was not seeking a ceasefire and would punish aggressors. The political positioning was set before Mojtaba officially took office. Now let's talk about what Trump's unconditional surrender demand actually means in practice, because most coverage is treating it as a rhetorical position when it may be something more specific. Trump told Axios that unconditional surrender means when Iran simply can't fight any longer, a definition that leaves the endpoint entirely in Washington's hands. He told NBC he wants Iran to have a good leader and has names in mind. He told Iranians to help take back their country and promised immunity to those who do. That is not a demand for a nuclear deal. That is a demand for regime change, the complete replacement of the Islamic Republic's political structure with something Washington considers acceptable. Iran's response to that demand is the appointment of Mojtaba Khamenei, which is itself a message deliberately chosen to defy Washington's stated position rather than accommodate it. Assembly of Experts member Haydari Al-Qasir said it directly. The candidate was picked specifically because he is hated by the enemy. The Assembly chose him precisely because Trump called him unacceptable. That is the logic of defiance operating in real time. Washington said no, and Tehran's institutional response was to do exactly what Washington said was unacceptable. In my view, this dynamic, where each side's public position signals resolve to its own domestic audience, is what makes a negotiated exit structurally difficult, regardless of what either side may actually want in the private backchannels that Pezeshkian's statement suggests are already active. Russia and China have already staked out their positions. Putin pledged unwavering support for Mojtaba's appointment. China stated it opposed any targeting of the new supreme leader. That alignment has real consequences. Russia and China's backing does not give Iran military superiority. Missile attacks have already fallen 90%. But it gives Iran political legitimacy in the UN Security Council and economic alternatives to Western pressure that earlier Iranian governments simply did not have. Qatar's energy minister Saad al-Kaabi warned this week that rising oil prices due to the war could bring down the economies of the world. Oil has already surpassed $110 per barrel, according to CNBC. That economic pressure is building on both sides simultaneously. And here is the dimension that history tells us matters most in conflicts that appear structurally frozen. Both sides are absorbing costs that cannot continue indefinitely. 7 U.S. service members have died, confirmed by CENTCOM on March 8th. At least 1,232 Iranian civilians killed, according to Iran's UN ambassador. More than 95,000 people have fled Beirut's suburbs in southern Lebanon after sweeping Israeli evacuation warnings, numbers that keep rising with each night of strikes. The Strait of Hormuz remains technically open, but Qatar's energy minister's warning and oil above $110 shows the market is already pricing in the risk that it may not stay that way. For Mojtaba, the question is not whether to fight. That decision was made before he took office by the IRGC commanders who installed him. The question is whether he can carve out enough independent authority, enough distance from the commanders who put him there, to become a real decision maker rather than a figurehead. Based on everything we know about him, decades in the shadows, deep knowledge of the IRGC's internal workings, that is not an impossible outcome, but it is a very long way from where he stands on March 9th, 2026. In hiding, silent, dependent on the loyalty of commanders he cannot yet afford to contradict. What we are watching this week is the opening chapter of a leadership whose trajectory will define the entire Middle East for a generation or more. A man no one has heard speak, leading a country at war, threatened by 2 governments, installed by a military organization that answers to no one. The name Khamenei, as the Assembly of Experts stated in its announcement, will continue. The same name that has governed Iran for 37 years. What that name means for the next decade, for Iran's nuclear program, for the Strait of Hormuz, for every country calculating its position, is the question nobody can fully answer on March 9th, 2026. And the fact that nobody can fully answer it right now is itself the most consequential signal of this entire story, more than any missile count or battle damage report. If this kind of deep, sourced, real-time analysis is why you watch this channel, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. This story is far from finished. What happens in the next 30 days will determine whether this chapter ends in a negotiated settlement or a prolonged campaign, or something that none of the analysts currently modeling this conflict have fully accounted for, which, historically, is how the most consequential shifts begin. Drop a comment below. What do you think Mojtaba Khamenei's first real decision as Supreme Leader will be? And does he survive long enough to make it? Thank you for watching.